Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles individuals who are passionate about what they do for a living, about what organization they belong to, or simply passionate about the community they are a part of. Hello there, and welcome. My name is Dave Cunningham. Our guest today is a well-known singer, songwriter, performer, musician, Michael Myers. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, and welcome. And it's great to be here in this grand old place.
Institution. Back to 1922.
Geez, I think I remember recording something here back in 69, 68.
A lot of stuff has gone through these doorways.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I've been doing this show for about a year now, and I've interviewed other musicians and singer-songwriters from the area, people like Cliff Edwards, John Malcolm, Kevin Head, Georgette Fry. We talk about the rich culture of musical ability in this community. And every time we talk about that, your name seems to come up quite frequently as one of the people who's been around a while and doing a great job and, dedicated to their particular craft. Mm-hmm. What about the community of musicians in this town?
Well, there's... I've lived here most of my life, and so I've got to meet a lot, and it's a thriving. I was just saying recently to somebody, I look around at the clubs and different venues, and there seems to be a lot of live music. Musicians are getting work in the city. I know my generation of musicians, and there's a whole younger crowd coming up, so it's thriving.
Let's go back a few years to when you and I were both in high school. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's when the horse and buggies were still on the street. Not quite that far back. You expect
me to remember that? It's the 60s. You're not supposed to remember the 60s if you were there. Okay.
You were involved in bands in high school.
Yes.
Did you ever envision this sort of track that your life would take in terms of music?
No, I never did. Although it really did attract me to be in. Of course, it got me through the years of high school. I made some extra money, and it was an exciting thing to do in high school. When you're a student. It kept. I was thinking of this the other day. It kept me off the dance floor in those terrifying dances, high school dances. I would be on the stage. Some people would think, "Oh, that must have been, at your age, terrifying to be on stage." Well, no, it's the other way around. Although, I would go to dances and hear other bands play. And there was some great bands that would come to Kingston. Mm-hmm. But I just took year after year and see things developed and evolved.
One of the things that I can recall from those days, and I'm sure if we have listeners who are from the same era, when we talk about bands performing in high schools, I remember one fellow that used to get up on stage quite frequently, and his name was Stanley. Mm-hmm. And he used to play tambourine with just about every band that performed. Do you recall him and his...
Oh, yeah. Up until he was still a fixture here in Kingston up until 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, I was playing in a reformed version of the Growing Pains from around 2000 to 2010 or so, and Stanley was still there, and he was like he loved being around the bands, and he still would get up and play tambourine. Mm-hmm. And he would say to me, speaking of how long he's been around, he'd say to me, "Mike, we've been together we've known each other since 1968. I think I met him the first time was in Lino's restaurant.
Now, there's another memory. Now, Growing Pains, you just mentioned Growing Pains. So that was your first band?
Yes, it was. In the 60s it was. We were 15 years old.
What kind of music would you have been playing back then?
We were... Well, I posted some photos on Facebook recently of the band from back then, and somebody wrote in, Kingston had a boy band? We used to play things like anywhere from Dino, Desi, and Billy, which was Dean Martin's sons and Desi Arnaz's son and so on. anywhere from there or to things like Hang On Sloopy to, some little Ugly Ducklings, Toronto. So we had we had some gritty stuff, and then we had some real pop stuff. But it was current stuff on the radio, and we also had an interesting thing was one of the guys in the band, Wayne Scott, his uncle was on this record list, a record record company. What do you call them now? Where you would
mail order
books,
albums.
Mail order. Yeah. And he with the States, so he would get all these records that were back in those days. It wasn't things would start being big or something in the States, but it would take a bit of time to get up into Canada. So and we would get these records that were becoming big in the States before they got up to Canada. So we were playing songs often before they were popular here.
On the radio here.
Yeah. So we were doing things like that too.
So how did it evolve? So you finish high school and you continue with the music, and right now you are doing quite a wide range of different things musically. But when you began, how did you sort of evolve to different genres of music?
Yeah. Well, in my family, my older brother, he was folk music was a big thing in our family. The Kingston Trio, groups like that. That's when I first started playing guitar. I was on acoustic guitar, and I would play. I'd be listening to this stuff, and so I was in the Growing Pains. That was my first sort of performing thing. But after that, and even at the same time, I started working in a folk music genre with another fellow in town, Mark Haynes. And we had a duo, and we would play the Simon & Garfunkel, early James Taylor, and the classic folk stuff. I was in a folk mass group. We would go around and play at masses and for weddings and at masses, playing folk music. So there was that. And so those were the two at the time in the 60s before I got into. Then I got into songwriting, and then that evolved. Then next thing I know, I got into this theater company, and so everything started, going crazy.
You've got a long resume of different sorts of activities. So you started doing your own songs, and I always envision that as being something really difficult to do, is to sit down and write something that's original, that's different from what you may have heard elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So how did that process begin? Were you just tired of what you were singing and wanted to try something else, or?
Yeah, the origins of why I wanted to. I don't know. I got into writing songs. I remember I had a tape deck at home, a reel-to-reel tape deck, and I just all of a sudden I started writing these songs about my experiences. I guess it was being a teenager, and the different things that a teenager has to deal with. I found songwriting, all this teenage angst and all this other stuff informed my songwriting, and songwriting was an outlet for that. I remember, but I also at the same time remember one of the first songs I ever wrote was called. This had nothing to do with teenage angst. It was called Stingray. It was 3 chords like a la Neil Diamond, and it was. The chorus line, the hook line was, "Yeah, she's my stingray with the big flashy tail." Although, Wayne Scott's uncle said, "Mike, maybe you don't want to sing that line." I don't know. What do you mean? I don't know. It was perfectly innocent. But yeah.
Let's move ahead a little bit and talk a little bit about the Big Phat Horn Band. Mm-hmm. So at some particular point, you got interested in fronting a bigger band.
Yes.
And a totally different genre than you had done when you were in high school, let's say. How did that come together?
Well, I was in 1971, I was in a horn band. I was the bass player and singer in this, but it was more along the lines of Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Yeah.
So I did that for a little while. And also in high school, I was in a band where I was just the singer. I wasn't playing guitar. So those were two things which I'm now doing in the Big Phat Horn Band. And I always had this this fantasy in my mind. I love the idea of being a lead singer in front of a hot band and not have a guitar slung over my shoulders, but just be able to use my voice, which is, in a lot of ways, is my main instrument, and use that as what my way of performing and projecting what I wanted to, project musically to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So the horn band, and what we're doing now, the Big Phat Horn Band, it not only does I love the swing and the standard stuff like the Bublé and the Sinatra stuff that we do, but we also do like the Colin James rock and blues stuff. We do Van Morrison stuff. We do some of the Lighthouse and Blood, Sweat, and Tears still. So it really covers a wide variety of stuff, of music genres that I'm familiar with anyways. So it's like, this is sort of a natural thing for me to do now. My music career has evolved to this point in the Big Phat Horn Band, whereas people are telling me, Michael, this is what you should be doing. This is totally natural for you.
So the band is like a blend of a lot of the stuff that you have been doing.
It's yeah.
I said before we started recording that I really enjoy the sound of a big band with the horns and all the other instruments involved. Mm-hmm. It's just got that sound that just grabs you when you're performing. We were talking before the song about your experience with the Big Phat Horn Band, and I don't know how much there is a relationship between that and the show that you put on called The Bobby Show. And tell us a little bit about The Bobby Show.
Well, The Bobby Show, it was a result of me searching around for an idea. I think I wanted to put together a themed show, rather than always think, okay, I have to get a gig here at this bar, I got to go to this bar to play this gig, I got to see, it's always changing. I wanted something that was a little more where I could take it to theaters or cabaret settings or whatever, that way, out of the typical bar, play a song, cover song type of thing. So it was a theme, and I grew. When I was young, my first exposure to music was in the late 50s and the music back then, the pop music back then.
Before Elvis and before the British invasion.
Well, around Elvis's time, but before the British invasion. But it was always in the background. There was a Connie Francis album always being played at my home, and things like that. And And I remember, so when I was thinking of this idea to put together a show, a theme show, I remember then there was an awful lot of those singers were named Bobby, and it had a sort of refreshing, bright sound to it. Whenever I think of the music and I think of the name Bobby, so I don't know. I thought it dawned on me one night, The Bobby Show.
So for those who may not have been born back in the 50s or 60s, we're talking Bobby V and Bobby Vinton.
Bobby Darin, Bobby Curtola, Canada's Bobby Curtola, Bobby Day, Bobby Helms. There's 9 of them in our show. Bobby Rydell. And they all had a string of hits, and that was sort of the criteria. There was other Bobbies. I love this Bobby Fuller 4. But he had
I Fought the Law. Yeah,
I Fought the Law. I do that now in my other bands, but I thought no, I got to put a stop somewhere. So these Bobbies had a certain, and they came from that era, late 50s, early 60s, and they had 3, 4, 5 hits, and so I would pick 3 or so of my favorite songs and put them in the show, tell little stories in between. And put them in a setting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You talked about wanting to create a different kind of show that you could bring into a theater or some sort of cabaret or something like that. Now, you have been involved with theater, particularly Theater 5. Have you done acting, or is it just accompanying, or what?
Well, the original job was just to provide music and accompaniment and to their shows, their live shows, and they were into a lot of when I first joined them, improvisation, but they would have set skits. We would be going to schools which eventually went into theaters. But I would provide the musical accompaniment, and often I would be called upon. Well, gee, Michael, we need somebody to do this just for a moment. So I would end up doing a walk on until eventually I had some main parts, which I did was just acting, and it had nothing to do with the music. There was a few shows I did that way.
So you toured with the group as well?
That's right. Yeah. Well, there's 2 times from about 71 to 75 or 70 to 75. I worked with them. We used to tour around schools, in gymnasiums, and so on, and And that's where I sort of first started feeling a lot more comfortable about going out and playing by myself on guitar, because at some point in the show, I would get out in front of the audience and sing one song just as part of this is part of this variety show we would do. We would also do anything, like we'd do penitentiaries too. I remember we did a few of those. Then I left them from about 75 to 80, I moved to Toronto, tried to explore my music career more there. Then I got called back to Kingston from about 80 to 85. I wrote the music and lyrics for a lot of their classic fairy tales, which we put on in theaters around Southern Ontario. And that was an exciting time too. So that was a very big influence in my career, has been theater in Theater 5.
Before we started recording, we started to throw around the word diversification. And when we talk about you performing with the Big Phat Horn Band, and we talk about you performing solo, and talk about you performing with Theater 5, there's a couple of other groups that you are involved with, and still, one is Hat Trick and one is River Cats.
Yes.
And I think I would have covered them all. I think so.
Yeah.
Hat Trick is a revival of the Growing Pains, or
well, when the Growing Pains folded back, we played in the '60s, the Growing Pains, and then it was about 20 years later, in 2000, we thought we'd get back together and play the same style of music. So we did that for about 9 years, and then the band folded, but 3 of the members, including myself, they wanted to keep on playing and performing that style of music. So the drummer and the lead guitarist and myself, I decided, well, okay, I'll be the bass player. So I played bass. I play bass in this trio called Hat Trick.
And the River Cats?
The River Cats. Well, we've been doing Spencer Evans and I. We're the entertainment on the Island Queen, the main entertainment on the Island Queen, and we've been doing that now for 20 years, and that covers all over the place. He's big on the clarinet and piano and the New Orleans style of music, and we'll do that. And of course, it's a New Orleans style riverboat that we're on, so it really works well that way. And and we do some rock and roll. We'll do old this and that, whatever works in our variety type show.
I have a sort of a sidebar question here. When it comes to performing, as much as you do based upon your different combinations of groups and stuff, is how do you keep your voice in shape? Because you must be doing, and particularly in the summertime, you're doing a lot of different gigs.
Yeah, well, actually I find in the summertime is when my voice is at its strongest because I'm using it a lot. So I think and I've never actually taken proper singing lessons. So some singing teachers would say, "Oh boy, you're putting a lot of strain on your voice, or you shouldn't do it this. You should warm up for this and that." But I've been lucky, and it's always been a pretty strong muscle. Although in the middle of winter, if I'm not using it much, it's easy to lose my voice, especially playing in these rock and roll settings and so on, where you're straining it. So yeah, in the winter, I should be using it more. But in the summertime, when I'm really using it a lot, it's quite strong. Yeah.
You've done a lot of recordings during your career, and one of the notes that I saw on your website, which sort of triggered something in my mind, is that most of us, when we read about people going into a recording studio, so you pay for a recording studio's time, and you have it booked for a particular time, so you have to get yourself in shape, you have to get everything memorized, or at least organized in terms of what you're going to do. Yes. But I gather you do more of your stuff at home using some of the technology that's available to you now that wasn't, say, 40 years ago. Yeah,
now, the last album I did of my songs, I did at home. They were what you call demos of these, I think it was 9 songs there. And I thought, okay, well, these are the demos, and then that'll be my template to go into the studio and spend a whole bunch of money and put this CD together, and and God knows how much. These aren't recordings that are going to go across to all the radio stations in North America and the world and be on their hip rating like that. So it's a big risk. And so I thought, and I listened to my demos, which I recorded at home using on my computer software, GarageBand in this case, and I thought, well, I'm happy with this. I like what I did here. It's I don't want to go back into the studio and do it all over again. So I thought I'm just going to release it as is. Mm-hmm. And it's a small recording. Now, I have no dreams of it becoming, because it's done on a humble basis in my apartment. But it's merchandise, and it's something I've done. It's a recording of my songs. It's my artwork being shown, on and recorded here and
made available to people.
Made available to the public, yeah.
Before we leave the show here, why don't we run through some of the dates that you're going to be performing in the next little while, so people can take the opportunity to catch your act, whatever your act may happen to be.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be, the Bobby show we were talking about, November 19th, I'm doing that again at the RCHA. We're doing it that's a Sunday afternoon. The Big Phat Horn Band is in a week and a half, September 30th. And that's at the RCHA. Also at the RCHA has been great for me. They book me a lot these days. October 13th, the Limestone Rock and Roll Review, which is a collection of a bunch of great musicians from in town and singers, and we're doing the Pioneers of Rock and Roll. October 14th, Hat Trick, at the RCHA.
You're a busy guy.
Well, yeah, it sounds that way, but I have a lot of downtime. That's what I do for a living, and I don't. If I get 2 or 3 gigs in a day, that gets sometimes a little overwhelming. I tend to I need space in between each. But yeah, if I'll do 2 or 3 gigs a week.
And that will wrap up the program, Michael. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Theme music for the program is Stasis Oasis, a tune written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of our episodes, please send a note to the Kingstonian Podcast Facebook page. This is Dave Cunningham from Kingston, Ontario. Thank you for listening. Until next time.